What's being in a coma like, and how did life change afterwards? My friend told me that while he was snowboarding, he hit a tree, fell unconscious and was airlifted to hospital and in a coma for 2 weeks. While he was in a coma, he remembers walking in a field, a wolf by his side, walking towards a tree in the distance. For days, he wasn't getting any closer to the tree, then suddenly he and the wolf got closer and closer until they were at the tree. The tree was beautiful and it had a face, but the face kept changing faces. From people he had met in the past to people he met later in life. The tree reached its hand out toward him and was holding a key. He grabbed the key from the tree, held it to his heart, and the wolf disappeared. The tree disappeared and he woke up. He now volunteers in a wolf sanctuary. I can't remember where, but I've heard similar stories. People climbing stairs endlessly, trying to reach an island by a boat, waiting for a plane to land. Only when they got to the top of the stairs, reached the island or the plane landed, and they got off, did they wake up. Honestly, still feeling the after effects some 7 months later. I always feel high, like a piece of me is gone and won't come back. I spent the first 6 weeks after waking up wondering who I was. I've been diagnosed with depersonalization derealization disorder. Look into it, there's a lot of us out there. It's so hard sometimes to get through it. I wake up every morning wondering if I'm even real. No one understands and they just give me Xanax to deal with the panic attacks. Walking in woods really helps me a lot, and just trying to be normal and doing things you used to helps. But there isn't a day that goes by that I don't feel like I'm back at square one. To anyone else going through this, all I can say is stay strong. I remember someone saying that they felt the same way you do after a coma, and they felt like they were in that twilight zone you're in when you first wake up from sleeping. He went bungee jumping off a bridge and had a fear of heights, and he said it was like someone flipped a switch and he felt normal again after that. I was in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks or so, and I was on a crap ton of medication and had some horrible hallucinations, an experience I'm told by ICU nurses is very common. I knew I was injured and in hospital. Apparently they kept waking me every day to check my brain function, but I was not aware of why, so I spent a lot of time very confused with vague hospital-based nightmares. Also, some Game of Thrones hallucinations, because my brother visited and talked about the show at my bedside, and I fought a dragon as a result in my head. I can't say exactly how much time passed because A, it was more than 2 years ago, and I've tried to forget, and B, things from the outside broke in, but from different times than you'd expect. A news story from 1 week into the coma felt like it was at the start of the hallucinations. But I might be remembering things wrong. The brain works in very mysterious ways, especially when you're high as frick. I don't remember waking up or learning about my accident, though I've been informed I had to be told every 30 minutes or so for the first few hours I was awake, as I'd start to panic and be confused. I only remember the day after I woke up, when I already knew what had happened. I wouldn't recommend the experience to anyone, though I did later get a tattoo of a dragon to commemorate it. So far, medically induced coma sounds much less pleasant than the accidental sort. I suppose that in the greater scheme of things, it's probably better to have something like this be controlled, though. I was born 3 months early and spent the first 6 weeks of my life alternating between an NICU incubator and ice baths for the extreme prolonged fever. Although I obviously survived a difficult infancy, my immune system is questionable at best. I've suffered from unexplained fevers, FUO, fevers of unknown origin, off and on throughout my life. When I was 19, I contracted an often fatal infectious disease. My parents were traveling out of the country, so I was home alone, and by the time I realized that I needed medical attention, I couldn't move. It was during this period that I began to slip in and out of consciousness. My older brother lived a few blocks away with his wife and kid. He was trying to be cool and let me party my butt off while my parents were gone, but after 3 days of radio silence, he started to get worried and came to my house to check on me. He found me in my bed, unconscious and radiating heat. He carried me down the stairs, put me in his car, and burned rubber to the ER. He broke 2 of my bones while doing this, but seeing as how I was 6'1", 180 pounds, and literally unconscious, it's not surprising. And before you ask, I have no freaking idea why he didn't just call 911 and let the paramedics do it. I was in hospital for 11 weeks, completely unconscious for 3 of them, and in and out of consciousness for 7 weeks. I have 6 or so extremely disjointed memories that, according to my brother and parents, take place over the next 3 weeks. One was of the sheer panic that ensued in the ER once they got a diagnosis and were trying to quarantine me and everyone who'd touched me. Another was of my parents standing over me weeping. There's absolutely no chronology to my memories themselves, but based on third-party accounts, I've been able to piece together the timeline of what happened to me. The moment that my parents stood over me weeping was right after the doctors told them to go home, get rest, and hit the funeral home the next morning to make my final arrangements. They were standing there weeping, trying to decide what to do, if listening to the physician was the right call. when I opened my eyes and looked around for less than 1 minute before slipping away again. That was all the time they needed to decide, screw that doctor, this is our kid. They never gave up and literally never left me alone again for the duration of my hospital visit. Remember those fevers I mentioned, the ones that I'd had since birth? Yeah, it turns out that a dangerously high, prolonged fever is what killed the virus I had. It also gave me thermal brain damage, but never mind, I'm alive. Just slightly dumber. If you've ever been under general anesthesia, you'll know what a coma is like. That's a kind of medically induced coma. If you haven't had that, it's not even like sleep. You're awake 1 minute and waking from surgery the next, with no awareness of what's happened in between, unless you wake up during surgery. That happened with me last time. I was having chest surgery. I tried to sit up on the operating table. Scared the crap out of the med students. No pain, just confusion, and I went back under pretty fast. Yes, some people do have different experiences with comas, and some people experience floating above their body under anesthesia and hallucinations and delusions. When I come out of anesthesia, I'm violent. Everyone is different, but the majority of people who've been in comas say it's the same thing as going under for an operation. This is kind of what I thought being in a coma was like. When I had surgery, the thing I was most worried about was going under general anesthesia, just because I'd never done it before. I had the needle put into the vein, the nurses were all joking around, no, I don't care that the anesthesia I'm getting is the same thing that killed Michael Jackson. Then I was wheeled into the operating room. They opened the tube and I felt the coolness of the anesthesia going into my vein, then nothing until I was waking up in the recovery room. No wakefulness, no hearing voices, and no passage of time. Simply nothing. Yeah, when I had my wisdom teeth out, my memory is exactly, so we're going to put this in your arm here and we'll put you under in a minute. The procedure went well. It was like I blinked. Kinda terrifying actually. Like every moment I could just wake up and be somewhere else. I feel like it would be really confusing if you had accidentally gone into a coma. Holy crap, I never thought I'd tell this story. I was in a car accident at 19 and in a coma for 3 months. A couple of weird things happened. First, I was fully aware of everything for a couple of days before actually waking up. I couldn't open my eyes or move or talk, but I heard and felt everything. It was terrifying because I honestly thought it would last forever. After 2 days of this, I fell asleep and when I woke up I was fully conscious and never more relieved in my life. I thought at first that I'd just slept for 3 months, but after a couple of weeks of being out of the coma, I started having the weird, most vivid recurring dreams and flashbacks of literally being another person. I'd never experienced anything like this before the coma. I'd never had a recurring dream in my life, but since the coma, I've had the same 4 or 5 dreams hundreds of times, and in each one I'm the same person, but not me. They're freaky, and I always wake up panicked and often find out that I'm sleepwalking as well. And that also never happened before the coma. I'm pretty convinced that during the coma I lived some other life in a super long and intense dream. It's the only explanation I can come up with. I definitely recall reading about a guy who was in a coma or dream and lived a completely separate life. When he woke up, he was devastated because he had had a whole family, wife and children, in the dream and then they were gone. I've had vivid dreams just when I was lying in bed with a fever, so maybe it's just the default screensaver of an inactive brain. Mine after 2 days were pretty intense and skewed my reality out of whack, so I can imagine a brain's creation after 3 months would be a pretty rough illusion to be pulled out of. I was in a coma for 3 weeks nearly 3 years ago, nearly dying several times from double pneumonia and a strain of flu that was killing younger, healthier people. I remember precisely nothing. Little flashes of faces and pieces of dialogue maybe. Everything I know about that period was told to me by my parents, boyfriend at the time, and doctors and nurses. Maybe some people can hear what's going on around them while they're in a comatose state, but I wasn't one of them. My mum talked to me the whole time and read to me, hoping I could hear. I actually brought a book with me to the ER since it's not like I was expecting the coma, so she found that and read from it. It was The Bedroom Life of Catherine M. When I awoke, I wasn't confused or anything. I recognized that I was in a hospital room, and I remember being in the ER weeks before. It was the last thing I remembered. I thought maybe I'd been there a couple of days and had just slept off the worst of it. Then I saw the dry erase board on the wall in front of me where someone had thoughtfully written the date. My first thought? I'm so tired. My second thought? I can't move. My third thought was, I can't talk? What the frick is this thing in my throat? Get it out! Get it out! Get it out! Turns out the coma is the good part. The recovery afterward, learning to walk again because your muscles have atrophied, waiting for your voice to come back because you've been intubated all this time, trying to pee without help, and oh man, really trying hard to not get depressed. That's the crap show. Epilogue: after I woke up, 1,000 doctors and nurses came in to gawk at me and called me a miracle because apparently that's how close I was to death. The ones that helped me survive kept asking if I remembered them, which made me nuts. Like, I know they spent their entire work shifts for 3 weeks with me, but I was comatose, so sorry, no, I don't remember you. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was in a car accident when I was 17 and was in an induced coma for 2 weeks. I remember bits and pieces. I remember one thing in particular right before being taken off the medication. I remember being told I needed to stop moving because I'd been in a wreck. I remember looking around and seeing 2 midget doctors jumping from one bed to another trying to get to me. They were wearing full-size medical gear that dragged on the floor behind them. They got to my bed and put more medicine in me. I looked back and they jumped off the bed and started walking out the door, laughing. After I was woken from the coma, I asked about the midget doctors. Turns out there weren't any midget doctors. You were in a midget hospital, but then they moved you. Last year at the end of July, my transplant kidney was failing and I'd caught pneumonia. Doctors were like, "We're gonna put you under for a few days," and I was like, "What do you mean under?" Well, they told me and I called my parents across the United States. Little did I know I'd wake up 5 weeks later. Apparently, it was a fight. I woke to my parents at my side. I thought it was just a day or two, but yeah, 5 weeks had passed and no one told me it was September till I was up for like a week. Missed my 33rd birthday last year. Well, I had really vivid dreams that were mostly great. I'll go into detail about the dreams mainly because I really haven't done it before. Traveling places, seeing things, crazy parties on charter planes with tigers and motorcycles. I can accurately recall about 5 to 10 of them. Then I had one particular nightmare that was really scary, that was like Mario meets dialysis in a 007 GoldenEye bunker. Mind you, my transplant kidney failed while I was under, so they had to put me back on dialysis without my acknowledgement. But that was the only part I can recall. I remember swimming somewhere tropical like Hawaii or something, and the water was really thick but I could still almost breathe. Then another one that was probably the strangest and most laughable. I remember being suddenly in some Asian skyscraper in some fast food joint of all places, trying to play this motorcycle game so I could win money to Uber back home. Then laughing to myself because that would take a lot of money to Uber back from Asia. That one was really weird and felt like Inception or something, the frickin' Matrix. In terms of input, 2 things stuck out. My mum on that plane telling me not to do substances, and the other one was doing yoga with Bindi Irwin. Well, when I woke in September, I was still foggy, but I remembered all of those dreams pretty accurately. I thought I was just having a lot of strange dreams. The Bindi input was apparently because my parents had been watching television and she had been on Dancing with the Stars or was training for it or something. So basically, I was atrophied to crap. I was out for 5 weeks, didn't stand for 10 weeks, didn't walk till 12 weeks. About a total of 7 to 8 months recovery, but was still rough around the edges for most of this year, 2016. Doing much better though. It was the single most horrible 2 weeks of my life. I was put in a coma for 2 weeks and I heard everything. I screamed at myself to wake up, but I couldn't move at all. I stared at my eyelids for 2 weeks, screaming to get up, but was completely paralyzed. I heard my family at my bedside. I felt my girlfriend brushing my hair out of my eyes. I felt the nurse give me a dry bath, but I couldn't move. It was the worst experience of my life. I had surgery. It was 9.5 hours. I didn't wake up. I have one memory of a nurse slapping and screaming at me in the recovery room, then nothing. It was like a TV that was unplugged. The next thing I knew, I woke up to a priest saying last rites over me. I'm not Catholic. I croaked at him to F off because I wasn't going to die. He flees. A nurse comes running in and says I've been in a coma for 4.5 days. I experienced nothing. I was here and then I was gone. Then I was back and it was instantaneous. There was no sensation of the passage of time for me. Who invited the priest? It seems weird that he just showed up. Oh my god, the devil has risen. Flee! Well, it sounds like our friend here lived out a low-budget Exorcist sequel upon returning to the world of the living. I wonder if that priest aged a few years from the shock. Mine was like a really long, vivid dream. Like me in my own body performing these actions that I know have happened before, but all I can do is spectate. Like replaying a video. I pretty much relived entire chunks of my life ranging from hours to days long. I was out for a month. I was in a medical coma due to going septic from a kidney stone. Previous to the coma, I was basically in a room and every time I fell asleep, a crash cart and doctors woke me up. They brought me to surgery and I woke up a week later, but during the coma I was having a nightmare that was so real that when I did come out of it I was convinced it happened to me. I dreamt that I was transferred from the hospital to a doctor's house to recover. They had me in a recliner that I couldn't sit up from, and there was a fireplace with a TV in front of me. In the dream it was someone's birthday at the doctor's house, and any time I called out to ask for help, I was treated roughly and rudely. When I did wake up, I noticed a few things in my room resembled the dream. The bed I was in made it nearly impossible to move. Although my legs were useless and I had to relearn to walk, the room had glass windows in front of me and on the side. And there was a nurse that I remembered that was the only nice person in my dream. My husband said that I seemed lucid and he would ask me questions and get answers. But I don't remember any of that. I went in the night of my son's birthday at the end of July and got out mid-August. It was hell. In 2008, I had to undergo a series of operations to remove a brain tumor that was very close to my brainstem. After the first operation, I'd apparently developed some sort of trouble regulating my blood pressure, and it kept spiking and falling, so the decision was made to put me into a coma. This has never been explained to me, and my memories are very hazy. If any neurologists or neurosurgeons here could tell me the logic, I'd love to hear it. What I mostly remember is having a bad night where I couldn't sleep, because the nurse kept fiddling with my IV. My dad was there, but I had no sense of anything that was wrong. I was just tired. Finally, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was very weak and sore. It felt like I'd slept for 14 hours, but it was something like 12 days. I have no memories of the interim at all. Just like surgery, 1 second you're there and 1 second you're waking up. You never even know that you're gone. In a weird way, this settled all of my fears of death, too. Either the lights go out and we literally never know it, or there's some sort of eternal reward or punishment. If it's lights out, well, I've been there and there's nothing to fear. If it's a reward or punishment, Pascal's wager applies. Since there's no way to know which belief system is right, pick the one that works for you, don't be a butthole, and pray. Although I've never been in a coma, I did go through an experience which is one of the strangest things to happen to me. When I was 19, I visited my aunt during the summer holidays. I was playing my cousin's PlayStation, although I was tired from the journey since I didn't get any proper sleep on the bus and had been awake for over 24 hours. I suddenly started getting an epileptic seizure and fainted. My mum and aunt screamed and tried to wake me up. The neighbors came in, hearing the noise, and took their car to take me to the hospital. They brought me to the hospital and I didn't regain consciousness until almost 3 hours later. The crazy part is this, which my aunt told me later, was that when I lost consciousness, I was still able to get up, put on the jacket and get out the door and in the elevator, get in my car, set on my way to the hospital, opened the door of the car and walked into the hospital before collapsing on the bed. I had absolutely zero recollection of any of this after I regained consciousness. I was in a coma after a car accident where I sustained a brain injury. The last thing I remember was pulling out of my friend's driveway a couple of times away from where we got into the accident. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital a few days later. No passage of time, no angels, no meeting with a god who sent me back, just literally nothing in between those two memories, just waking up in a hospital bed. On top of this, I suffered from anterograde amnesia for 11 months after the accident. Though I was conscious and functioning in daily life, I didn't retain any long-term memory. The last thing I remember, albeit briefly, is waking up in the hospital in July 2005. My next clear memory I know I remember is around the time I graduated high school in June 2006. I don't remember anything about my senior year. Sometimes people tell me stories about stuff I did, and it seems like it could have happened to me, but I don't actually recall it firsthand. My mum said one night I showed up at home with a ripped shirt and scratches, and someone's weave in my hand. No idea what happened. I don't think we'll ever know. Not me personally, but a friend of a friend whose story is semi-famous. He's an avid, venomous snake collector with a formidable collection. One day he was handling his king cobra which decides to make a go at him and nips him in the arm. He assumes it's a dry bite and isn't worried about it, but starts to head toward the hospital just in case. Halfway there, he starts getting very dizzy and sweating profusely. He has to pull over and lay down in the grass because it gets so bad. Calls 911 at this point, and ambulance gets there in a few minutes to find him struggling for breath. They get to the hospital when the search for antivenom begins, but the only Cobra antivenom nearby was expired. They have a guy fly some in from a neighboring state, but the guy's respiratory system shuts down before the antivenom gets there. Cobra toxin kills people by paralyzing their diaphragm, so luckily they were able to keep him alive by intubating. He was in a coma for 2 or so weeks, and although paralyzed completely, he could hear everything going on, including his family trying to decide whether or not to pull the plug. How crazy. My girlfriend, recently passed, was in a coma from late January to mid-February of this year. She experienced a complete different reality in which someone named Benny saved her from freezing to death on a city bus and gave up his life in the process. She slowly realized it wasn't real after awaking from her coma. But 2 weeks after awakening, I asked her who she liked more, Benny or myself. She thought about it for a bit and said, "Well, he did save my life." Mid-March, when she was released from hospital, she would still tear up when thinking about Benny. I was in a 5-day coma when I was 17, 2013. I was hit by a car and fractured my skull. I don't remember the impact of the accident, but I remember being pulled into a grass yard. I remember the ambulance doors closing. I remember getting to the hospital and then I woke up. There was no concept of time and I ended up losing a bit of my short-term memory as well as having to relearn how to walk. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.